Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. I'm Peter Hansen alongside Shane Caldwell, and this is our Week 10 Primetime show on Sunday, November 15th, 2020. We're going to break down the Sunday night and Monday night games. And Shane, we've got two home underdogs here, two teams that I've spent a lot of time rooting for. New England, 7-point underdogs against the and the Bears 3-point underdogs against Minnesota. What are your thoughts here on this primetime slate?
Yeah, I don't know if you're gonna love enjoying these primetime games because if you're a fan of pretty much both of these teams here, it could get a little bit ugly potentially here. I think obviously Minnesota Chicago should be more of a close division battle there. But yeah, Baltimore and New England. Who would have thought New England would be at home 7-point underdogs? But a lot of things have changed in basically in a year's time here. Yeah, I don't really like how New England matches up against the Baltimore defense. The Baltimore offense has largely been pretty disappointing this year, but they're still a really talented group. Their defense has been as advertised. They're one of the best defenses all around. They don't really have any glaring weaknesses. And New England's offense is kind of, pretty iffy right now. Cam Newton, you don't really know what you're getting out of him. Yeah, so that's a nice way of putting it. They have some pieces, but yeah, so it looks kind of like an ugly game here, but I think, but Baltimore, the way they spread out their production, all these different running backs, and Lamar Jackson not being a good passer, that also makes it difficult to figure out which guys to target here. So yeah, I think we'll start on the Baltimore side here. Big favorites on the road here. They're going to have the highest implied total on this slate, over 25 points. And you got to look at Lamar Jackson because he's basically tough matchup through the air. New England's pretty good against the pass. They haven't been as dominant this year, though. Stephon Gilmore's still kind of questionable for New England, so you have to monitor that. But New England is still a really good secondary, good in coverage. Lamar Jackson's kind of struggled through the passing game. Baltimore needs to almost switch up their scheme and get some different play calling because, in the press, they're talking about how Lamar Jackson himself is complaining. They know our plays. They keep calling our plays. Right. So it's kind of like they studied the film, what Lamar Jackson did, all these NFL teams. They saw the tendencies. And this simplified offense of Baltimore is starting to get exploited now. They're figuring out ways to stop it. So Baltimore needs to make pivots and change it up. Let Lamar Jackson throw the ball a little bit more and actually throw it to wide receivers maybe, but it's a tough matchup. So basically in this matchup, if you're Baltimore, it's going to be another running game, and you're going to have, 3 or 4 running backs rotating in and out and just, pounding the ball. And then you're going to have Lamar Jackson getting loose on this New England team. New England's pretty bad against the run, one of the lower rated teams in terms of DVOA and also yards per carry and those type of things. So it's not in it. And Baltimore has a big run blocking advantage here too against their defensive front for New England. So everything is pointing to Lamar Jackson will get a little bit going in the passing game, but mostly just the running game here. So I like Lamar Jackson since he's pretty much the running back and quarterback. My favorite running back is probably J.K. Dobbins, but you can't always trust his ability to get carries because Mark Ingram's coming back now. So this is just it's very muddy in terms of the situation here. But Gus Edwards looks good because he's the goal line back. He's the guy that gets the touchdowns right now. But if I had to pick one just for overall talent, I know it's limited in terms of what he gets. I like J.K. Dobbins here. If you want to go a little cheaper and get the goal line role, then you can go to Gus Edwards. But my point is, even though they have a huge committee here and they're spreading it out, I think you need exposure to the running backs for Baltimore because that's the best way to attack New England, and it's in a good, favorable game script. So someone's going to get these garbage time. If they get a big lead in the second half, someone's going to get those garbage time, run the clock down, pound it, run it out type game script here. So the game script favors the running backs for Baltimore. So that's why I would target one of those guys. Probably not interested in Mark Ingram coming off injury, but Dobbins or Edwards is definitely in play. And then for the passing game, Marquis Brown's pretty much disappointed all year, but there's only so many guys you can attack here in terms of wide receivers. So I think he's in play. And then Mark Andrews, again, it all comes down to he's disappointing as well. I mean, Nick Boyle seems to be playing just as good as him, which is kind of crazy. So, yeah, Mark Andrews kind of hard to pay up for that price when you got a couple other tight ends you can look at here. But, this might be the game where Mark Andrews finally gets a touchdown or two too as well, though. But New England's just tough against all those positions. They're pretty tough against tight ends, pretty tough on wide receivers. So again, goes back to the running game here. So that's pretty much the breakdown for Baltimore. It's pretty tough because you know what they're going to do, but it's hard to predict the production for the fantasy points because they're going to spread it out to all these guys and just pound the ball.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It makes sense to try to get exposure to that rushing attack because that is the better way to attack New England. But with Ingram likely back in the lineup, you've got those three primary running backs, and then Lamar Jackson is basically a running back himself. I mean, last week, Jackson had 13 carries, J.K. Dobbins had 12, and Gus Edwards had 11. So it is hard to predict. You're just not getting a lot of volume for your dollar. So although it's a good matchup, I may avoid it in this two-game slate. What we're going to do here is break down the two-game slate on Draftkings, and hopefully that'll help you build your showdown lineups as well. But for the two-game slate, primetime slate on Draftkings, I may avoid all those running backs and pick out one of the receivers. The guy that I'm looking at is Marquis Brown. He's the first one you mentioned. And just looking at what happened last week, the Jets were able to beat New England deep. And I think this could finally be the time where Lamar, finds a way to get a couple deep passes to Hollywood Brown. So that's where I'm looking on the Baltimore side. On the New England side, I always try to dig in and analyze what I think the game plan is going to be. Belichick's notorious for that, picking out a couple guys to feature each week, and certainly with the running backs, that's the big challenge because there's another committee, and looks like we'll have that again. Right now, Harris is questionable, but we think he'll play. So if you've got Harris in the mix, that's the guy that got the majority of the carries against the Jets. But Baltimore has a tough run defense. So what I think the Patriots are going to do is look to the short passing game. And that's what they did last year against Baltimore in a similar game script where Baltimore was ahead. They won that game 37-20, and New England used the short passes. Edelman caught 10 passes for 89 yards that game, and Mohamed Sanu caught 10 passes for 81. And so I think the guy that fits into that profile is Jacoby Myers. Had a real nice game against the Jets. And, just looking at last week with Baltimore, Indianapolis really struggled through the air, but the passes that they were able to connect on were those short passes to guys like Pittman and Pascal, short slants. And those are the same patterns that Newton was hitting Myers on against the Jets. So I think they'll feature Myers again. And I think this could be a James White week. He's had sort of low volume this year, but in that game last year, he got 11 touches against Baltimore, 84 yards from scrimmage, got in the end zone. And so if the Patriots have any chance of winning here, I think they've got to feature White and Myers. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, no, those are the guys that I highlighted as well. Interesting though. I mean, based on that game plan, they are going to be playing from behind. Do you play Cam Newton in this slate as a low owned, as a contrarian play? Because, the way the matchup looks, people are not going to be looking towards Cam Newton here. So I think that's kind of interesting that Cam Newton would be in play. Plus, you're going to get the rushing upside here. So does Cam Newton actually get more passing yards as Lamar Jackson, but similar type production in the rushing game? That's certainly possible here. But yeah, I can see James White. If you think about Cam Newton in his prime throwing to Christian McCaffrey, a lot of those checkdowns and running back routes, James White has a similar type skill set. And you can't just pound the ball at the middle against this Baltimore defensive front. So that's the way you'd have to beat them, is get them out in space and get these playmakers like James White. And you're right, Belichick does look for their weakness and try to exploit that. He knows he's not going to be able to just beat them in the trenches like they normally used to be able to do here. So yeah, I can see James White getting heavily involved. And Jacoby Myers looks great. He's got great rapport with Cam, and a tough matchup, but Baltimore will, they'll defend against the deep pass and give up the underneath stuff, So yeah, I could see those guys racking up some points, especially in like a full PPR format like Draftkings here. So yeah, pretty tough. It's a low implied total for New England, but someone's got to get the, like I always say, they got to get the garbage time points if they're down big in the second half, so they can rack up some points that could be valuable in a showdown slate like this or a primetime slate.
Yeah, and you touched on the quarterback, so I'll follow up on that for one more point on this game. It's kind of surprising if you just look at the raw numbers in terms of fantasy production. This year, Lamar Jackson only has 3 games over 20 fantasy points on DraftKings. And Cam Newton, meanwhile, 4 of his 7 games he's been over 20. And yet he's much, much cheaper. So I agree. Cam Newton is certainly in play for me on this 2-game slate. So the lines we've been talking about so far are, of course, courtesy of our presenting sponsor, BetUS.com.pa. Again, the line here is Baltimore -7, over under 43.5. And that number is going to sound familiar when we get to the second game. But before we do that, let's take a minute to hear from our friends at BetUS.com.pa.
Wake up, sports bettors. Sports are in high gear at BetUS.com, so put down the beer and make every sporting event more exciting by putting stakes on the line at BetUS. Earn bragging rights over your friends as you rake in the cash from each week's betting action. But don't settle for any other book. Choose America's favorite sports book with over 25 trusted years in the industry, BetUS. You need a sports book with integrity and longevity, but more importantly, you need a sports book that pays. BetUS has your game with action on football, baseball, basketball, MMA, golf, horse racing, and even esports. No other sportsbook welcomes newcomers like BetUS with their jaw-dropping sign-up bonuses. Sign up now with promo code CoachTalk for 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000. The best in the biz. Now you have the best book in the business with the best DFS provider in the business, Coach Talk. Create your account to make point spread bets, futures bets, prop bets, entertainment bets, live bets, and more. No other sportsbook is as committed to their members as BetUS. Sign up now and get in on the winning side of the ball.
Welcome back, and thank you for that wonderful offer. This is available to all listeners here on the podcast, so use that promo code CoachTalk when you go to betus.com.pa. Make that first deposit, get a 125% match. And if you do that this weekend, you can get involved in these games here. So game 2, the lines you're going to be looking at right now are Minnesota -3 on the road for the Monday night game against Chicago. Over-under is, again, 43.5. And this one's going to kick off at 8:15 Monday night, looking like low 40s, clear weather. Could get a little wind in that first game, by the way. Forgot to mention that. So slightly better conditions in game 2 for passing, which I'm excited about because Minnesota is bad against the pass. And with Chicago, we've got the big news that Coach Nagy's not going to call plays here. So maybe we can finally get some rhythm going here for the Bears and air it out a little bit. In terms of injuries, it's really the rushing game that's the most affected for Chicago here with Montgomery out. And then on the Minnesota side, we've got Irv Smith out. So let's start on the Chicago side, Shane, because I want to hear your thoughts on this passing attack against Minnesota. They're ranked 30th in that department this year.
Yeah, interesting, though, how if you look at these teams, Minnesota started out really bad, and all of a sudden they're streaking now. They beat Green Bay and Detroit, 2 division foes there. And then Chicago, complete opposite, started out really good, and now they're struggling. So it's just interesting how these teams have completely flipped the script on each other here. But, yeah, Chicago, they're really decimated at running back. They were down to pretty much David Montgomery, who's been a workhorse for them. He hasn't been very productive, but he's been a workhorse. And now all of a sudden you got, Ryan Nall, who I looked at as more like a fullback type player. And then, who's the other running back? I don't know if they're going to get some practice squad guys going. We talked about how they had Lamar Jackson sitting as a veteran on the practice squad, but Cordell Patterson.
Lamar Miller. Yeah, Lamar Miller.
Lamar Miller. Yeah, Lamar Jackson. Yeah, so Cordell Patterson is he looks good when he plays running back too. I mean, he's more of a special teams wide receiver, so you could play him at wide receiver. But yeah, I think that they're going to spread him out and definitely run a lot more 3 and 4 wide receiver sets here, and let Nick Foles just run the run pass option, quick passes, and try to exploit the secondary. Minnesota obviously pretty weak in the secondary. They seem to be playing better lately, just in the last few games that I've noticed, but still young and inexperienced in the way we attack them. They don't have much of a pass rush. So this sets up good for Nick Foles, as he doesn't do well under pressure, but he shouldn't be under heavy pressure here, and definitely a weak secondary, and he's got some good pass guys to throw to. So I think Nick Foles is in play, and you can get him at a pretty cheap price on most on the primetime slates. We'll see with the showdowns how cheap he is there. So Nick Foles is in play. Love connecting him with Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson has been questionable this week, but he did get in some practices in limited fashion. So I think Allen Robinson's in a great matchup against Minnesota secondary. So I look for him to have a huge game here. And then the other guys, again, they're going to be running these 3 wide receiver sets almost the whole game. The way I look at it is Darnell Mooney's going to be in play. He's really cheap. If you look at the primetime games, he keeps getting better and better in terms of the rapport and the targets. And Anthony Miller, I think, will get more play here as well, as he usually lines up in the slot. But again, they should be running more 3 wide receiver sets. So Anthony Miller, I think, is a great playmaker that they don't always get the ball to that much. But I could see him having a breakout game. He's super cheap. And then you can play Cordell Patterson at wide receiver, and he might catch a couple passes, but he's going to probably get quite a bit of play at running back and get some plays there as well. And, Cordell Patterson, he only needs 1 play to break it, really, because, he reminds you of just like a punt returner, kick returner every time he gets the ball, and that guy's tough to bring down in space, and he's still super explosive. So I love Cordell Patterson as kind of contrarian play. Jimmy Graham looks good. He's got to find the fountain of youth here. Good matchup against Minnesota here as well. So I think Jimmy Graham's also in play. If you don't want to pay up for Mark Andrews in that first game, you can pay down for Jimmy Graham. And again, they're going to just be passing the ball a ton. That's just the way they're going to have to do it. So it's interesting how this matchup's the complete opposite, because one team's just going to run the ball that we'll talk about in Minnesota, and then Chicago is going to pass the ball here. So I imagine you got to love the Chicago passing game just as much as I do.
I do, and I think it could be the highest volume passing attack on this slate, because we know in that first game, Baltimore's going to try to run the ball and possess it and, make the game shorter and have less plays be run. And, if New England tries to pass it, sure, they may pass it more than Baltimore, but, Cam Newton can also run it himself. So there's just going to be a lot of rushing plays in that first game. And so here we get to the second game, and this is just a great matchup on paper for Chicago to throw it. And last week against Tennessee, Foles threw it 52 times. You just don't really think of the Bears in this division as that type of high volume passing attack, but they were last week, and I think they will be against Minnesota. And Foles, in that loss, he threw for 335 yards and 2 touchdowns. So again, Foles gets a bit of a bad rap, but just I think it makes sense. He's also the cheapest on the DraftKings primetime slate. So I agree. I'll pair him up with Robinson and Mooney. I like both of those guys. Graham, good matchup, like you said. Tight ends have made 13 receptions in the last 2 games against Minnesota. And Jimmy Graham has had at least 5 receptions in 3 of his last 4 games. So a bit of a renaissance for him. A good connection with Foles. And then one more note on the running backs. You alluded to Lamar Miller. He's not on the slate right now. We're recording this early Sunday morning. So there is still time, if they activate him, that he could be added to the slate. So keep that in mind. All right, Shane, on the Minnesota side, I'm curious where you want to go here, because Chicago has a pretty tough defense. So how are you looking to attack them here?
I mean, on these small slates, when you have a player that's this good like Dalvin Cook, you can't really make a case to fade Dalvin Cook even in a tough matchup, because when you watch the film, it wasn't just a fluke that he's had these huge monster fantasy games like just their scheme in terms of the way they block and Dalvin Cook's ability to cut back on a dime like that and explode through the hole and break tackles is definitely top level elite here. It's just they create so much space and they really challenge the defense. Really make them press, horizontally and then attack them vertically at the same time with these cutbacks. So just their blocking scheme and their execution of it, and Dalvin Cook, the way he's looked, even against a tough Bears front, he can definitely cause issues for them. So obviously, probably not going to expect a huge ceiling game, but in a smaller slate, whether you're playing showdown or primetime, Dalvin Cook, if he can even get to 20 fantasy points, is super valuable here. So that's why you just have to, just eat the chalk with Dalvin Cook here and play him. And already know Minnesota wants to do that. It's because it's not like you can attack Chicago in the passing game like they're weak in the passing game, because if you look at it, Minnesota actually does have a run blocking advantage against Chicago because of that great run scheme, and obviously an advantage at the running back position. But they have a big disadvantage in terms of trying to protect against the pass rush. It's not a good matchup against Khalil Mack and those guys. So you certainly don't want Kirk Cousins being under pressure trying to sling the ball around. So it's pretty much Dalvin Cook. I pretty much would fade Kirk Cousins. I don't trust him under that amount of pressure. And Chicago's really tough in the secondary as well. So that's the avenue for them to run it, and they are good enough to beat this tough defensive front, which is probably why Minnesota's favored. And then I probably would go, if I had to choose a wide receiver, probably go with Justin Jefferson. He'll probably be mostly on the rookie Jalen Johnson, although Jefferson moves all around. He seems to be still more explosive than Adam Thielen, who just hadn't seemed to do much lately, and Adam Thielen will probably see more Kyle Fuller. So I would pick Jefferson. He's a pretty reasonable price here. He still has big play upside. He's the type of guy that can definitely hit those huge plays and the run after the catch ability. So if they are going to hit him for one or two deep plays, it's Jefferson, in my opinion. And then you can take a look at Kyle Rudolph, just because he's cheap, and with the Irv Smith Jr. out, he's going to get all the tight end looks here, and you can exploit Chicago a little bit over in the middle with the tight ends, where you don't typically exploit them on the outside with tough coverage in the pass rush. So Kirk Cousins will be looking for those big tight ends in the middle, and that'll be Kyle Rudolph in this one. So he's certainly in play as well. But yeah, tough matchup, but really, really good running game with Dalvin Cook, obviously, and their scheme here. So that's why pretty obvious play here with Dalvin Cook. You just eat the chalk.
Yeah, I'll have him in my lineups for the reasons you mentioned. You could go Alexander Madison, to get it unique. He's good price. He got 12 carries last week against Detroit for 69 yards. So they can both produce because they are so good with that scheme, and they want to run it, and they do run it. So he's in play for me on a two-game slate. And with the pass catchers, I am interested in Kyle Rudolph a little bit. Tight ends have scored a touchdown against Chicago in 6 of 9 weeks. So, Rudolph hasn't been at the forefront this year with Smith Jr., but I think he's still capable, so he could pay off value here. All right, Shane, let's talk about membership real quick and what lineups we're going to be building here for our members. We give out the primetime lineup on Fanduel that you can just plug and play. We'll give the cash lineup and then the GPP lineup for the two-game slate. And we also give out full lineups on Fanduel for each showdown slate. So, we've talked mostly tonight about the two-game slate on Draftkings. But for our members, what we do is we actually go in and give full lineups for the showdown as well. So we'd love to have you folks join us for that. To become a member, just go to our website, dfscoachtalk.com, and get a weekly or monthly membership, or the winter special that takes you through the entire NFL season. So love to have you do that. Shane, do you want to tell everybody about our requests with YouTube?
Yeah, if you could subscribe on YouTube, appreciate the support so we can continue to give you great free content every single week. As we're a newer company, we're always looking for support there. So definitely subscribe and like. If you're on the Pod Center, definitely subscribe there and give us a good review as well. But definitely subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate the support so we can continue to give you great free content every single week.
Absolutely. And then social media, interact with us. We'd love to do that. Shane is at DET Sports Shane on Twitter. I am at Language Olympic, and you can find all of us at DFS Coach Talk. And then with our other shows this weekend, in case you are still looking for main slate research, go check out our quarterbacks show, the wide receiver tight ends podcast. We also did a running backs show. And then coming up next week, we'll get back on our schedule here on Thursday. We'll preview week 11 as we keep just grinding along each week with 6 podcasts in the NFL. So be sure to hit that alert button on YouTube, and we will catch you next time. So on behalf of Shane Caldwell and the rest of the DFS Coach Talk team, I'm Andrew Hansen. We'll see you on the next NFL podcast as we look to crush it in DFS.